Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Exercism podcast. I'm privileged to be joined by Brian Underwood. Brian, where are you living at this point in time? And tell us a little bit about your story and how you ended up where you are now.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. So I'm in Stockholm, Sweden. But originally I'm from the U.S., born in Ohio. So a bit of a journey from there. I guess you want to know where I am from, like my journey in between, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you end up going from middle of the U.S. to Sweden, Scandinavia? You know, that's quite a leap.
Sure. Yeah. Of course it's the middle of the U.S. I don't blame you for covering, like, nobody really knows where Ohio is. So, that's totally fine. So I went to Ohio State, for college, and that was like computer science, education. And that was fun. I enjoyed that. And I was sort of doing tech support in the College of Humanities. The whole time that I was there, I was fortunate enough to get a job there when I started, and I kind of continued on for a couple of years after I graduated. But then I sort of, I think I got a little bored of just where I was at and what I was doing, and also my girlfriend broke up with me. So let's not
not happy memories fully.
Yeah, I mean it was all fine in retrospect, but it's sort of like, okay, I've had an opportunity here, I think, and so I decided to take a few weeks traveling Europe, which is the first time I'd ever sort of really gone out of the U.S. for any extended period of time, and that was fun. Traveled through Europe, and then I decided before I did that, I decided I was going to move, and I had sort of settled on Boston as a place that I was going to move. Okay. And so I got, I guess, I don't know if I got lucky in a way, but I had a couple of opportunities where, like, I'd always done, like, Mac support was like a big thing that I'd done. So that was like one job that I had sort of had the opportunity to take, was like a tech support Mac job in Boston. And another one was this small startup that did software for, like, cell phone companies and the like, how they, like, lay out their merchandising in their stores. And I think I really wanted to transition to being a programmer, but this other job was like, oh, that's the thing I'd done for a long time. But I think I was leading on the side of, like, okay, I'm gonna, like, take on this new life, this career that I want. But I think I was also a little bit lucky in getting the job because I think they really needed someone, and so they just kind of took me on, and that turned out to be a sort of a big job that I had for a number of years. And then that was sort of like the beginnings. In short, sort of from there, I met my now wife, and we moved down to Providence. We got married there. Then we moved to California. I think my wife got a job in San Francisco, and I was like, "Yep, I'm a software developer. I can
do that.
find a job in San Francisco. No worries." So that was great. We lived in Oakland and worked in San Francisco for a couple of years. But then we decided we wanted to travel around for a couple of years. And so we ended up traveling around the world for 2 years with at the time by that time we had a 2.5-year-old son. And so we traveled with him for a couple of years, and then came back to the States a couple of years, and then we sort of decided, like, we passed through Stockholm in our travels, and we were like, we really like Stockholm, so we were like, okay, we're gonna come back, and that's where we've been for the last 4 years or so.
Is your wife Swedish, or is it just that you like Stockholm, or like what's the story there?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's the question a lot of people ask. But no, we're both American. All three of us are American, my son included. Although he speaks way better Swedish than either of us. We're working on it, but yeah, no, we just really liked it. I think there were a few places that we had traveled to that we were like, oh, maybe we might live here if we wanted to move somewhere. I think one of them was Auckland. It was a place that we traveled through, and we really liked that.
In New Zealand, Auckland, New Zealand.
New Zealand, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Wow.
But that was a bit far. That would have been like if we wanted to travel back to Ohio to visit family, that would have been a trek. It's still a bit of a trek from Sweden, obviously, but yeah.
Okay, and so now you mentioned like you made a comment about computer programming versus or computer sciences, excuse me, and programming. Like what was the difference? Because in my mind, computer sciences is kind of programming, but clearly not, or maybe yes. I don't know. So what did you mean by that specifically?
Yeah. I don't know if I know like the difference. I mean, I got a computer science degree, and I think it was programming, but it wasn't like, maybe you've heard or other people have heard like that you don't always learn in like with a university degree what the sort of real life things that you might learn and do in a job, and probably that's changed some since I went to college. I think that there's probably been a move towards more practical education, but like I remember, we would learn, I think like C and Java were some of the two main languages that we learned at the time. And in particular, I remember that we were learning this thing in Java in this one class where it was this, I think it was a teaching method or some sort of way of approaching things where you would very thoroughly comment each of your functions to say, it was like it's called design by contract, where you'd say like, what is it that, in a legal contract, sort of say like, okay, what are your responsibilities? What are my responsibilities? And so designing a function by contract means, okay, if you provide me these values in the variables and, you never provide me a negative number for this one, and you always make sure that this string is never empty or whatever, right? These are the things that you're responsible for. And then if you do that, I promise to do this, right? And make this happen. And so there was this comment structure that I remember being very confused, thinking that somehow the comments were executed and part of the program. And I think I spent a couple of days like what am I supposed to do here? And I eventually sort of caught on that it was just this sort of very formal method that, and I think it was good in a sense that like that thinking sometimes shapes my mind and think it's good to think about like, not having a function be able to deal with every single thing that can possibly happen, because that will just lead to madness.
Yeah. So now you went to university with computer science as kind of the main degree that you were looking at doing. How did you decide to do that? Was it just that you had a natural kind of gravity towards the sort of more scientific subject matter at school or high school, or was there a moment where you were like, actually this fits me really well? What was the kind of lead up to deciding that actually computer science was a degree that you would want to do?
Yeah, I was probably pretty lucky in just kind of being naturally drawn to it. I think I don't know, like I remember having sort of a choice in programs at one point where I could go into the arts and sciences program, computer science track, or the engineering computer sciences track. And one of them would involve like taking like language course, or like Spanish was the one I was sort of on track for from high school. But and the other one was like, oh, you don't have to do foreign language, but you have to do more physics and math. And I was like, okay, sign me up for that. So I guess that I think I was drawn to that. I think that it's like, although the one thing that I think about a lot is that, and maybe this is like sort of a scientific or mathematical interest privilege that I have, but I feel like probably doing math. A lot of people are sort of like, oh, math, like I get nervous about math or it's stressful or whatever. And I understand that could totally be the case. But I wonder if maybe sometimes some people just for whatever reason, like find the fun in the math and they're able to sort of like get excited about it. And it's like, it's the same amount of work in figuring things out, but it just doesn't feel like it because when we're having fun, it doesn't feel like as much work. It's probably not exactly that. That's just like a pet theory that I have. That's probably only half right.
But it was funny because so I remember doing chemistry for 3 years at GCSE in the UK, and for 2 years you have 3 years of learning up until your GCSE exams, and then you have these big exams at 16, and you do a whole range of topics. So you kind of do 10 different subjects, and that's like quite a lot. And then you decide, okay, I'm going to do A levels. I'm going to either do more maths or science or whatever, or English or drama or whatever. But I remember chemistry for me not clicking for about 2 years, and then in like the week before the exam, it all like made sense. So the periodic table and how all of that kind of worked, and I could get all the answers from the periodic table. I just have to it's like a crossword or whatever, and it was the light bulb going on. And I remember from that point being like, oh, this is the easiest subject ever. But it was 2 years of kind of struggle to get to that point. And it's just interesting because I feel like for me, coding is similar, which is it's like immerse yourself in it for a long time, and then the penny will drop. And I'm excited for when and it feels like it's moving in that direction. But I think what you're describing there, I saw friends who they just understood very, very quickly off the bat and kind of enjoyed it. And the problem solving aspect was a main feature of learning, which is very interesting. I find. So it's cool that you experienced that as well for yourself, I guess.
I know that there's this app actually that my son has played on his iPad. There's a company or a series of apps called Dragonbox. I don't know if you've ever heard of those. Mm-hmm. But they make some really nice educational apps. Like normally I'm pretty skeptical of like most educational apps. But they do a number of really good ones. And one of them is about geometry. And I find, I think about this as a metaphor a lot, that like, it wasn't geometry. I was algebra. There's a geometry one as well. But with the algebra one, it doesn't actually teach you the concepts of algebra. It teaches you the mechanics of algebra. And it does it in a way where you have two different sides with these two different boxes, and you have to make things sort of just balance on the two sides, right? You move the monster from one side to the other, or you have to transform them from a certain kind of monster to another. It's been a while since I've seen it, but what I remember so clearly is that he was learning the mechanics of algebra, even though he didn't understand what he was like working towards and why he was doing this. But it was fun to do it, and they did it in this way that like made it really engaging. And the thing I think is so great about that, and I want him to like go through the app again, because like when he starts to do algebra, because I feel like if you have the mechanics down, like then you don't have to worry about those so much, and you can sort of think more about the high level without having to get stressed about the mechanics stuff. And I think maybe that's the thing what you were saying with chemistry. I don't know if this is how it was for you, but like maybe it's like, why should I care about all this mechanics stuff and these rules and these things? But it's like once you get to a certain point, it's like, okay, I've kind of struggled through that. Now I can maybe care about why am I doing this?
Yeah. No, it was a really interesting experience, because it was the first time that I'd kind of gone through that process of understanding something, and then you kind of go through this period of losing a lot of confidence in those subject matters, because you think, oh, my brain isn't particularly wired towards that kind of thought process. But actually then if you look at English literature, for example, which was what I did, is you actually go very systematically through looking at language and how things are structured and understanding sort of, but there's a nuance, there's an artistic nature to that whole thing as well, which, I mean, you could say there's also that artistic element in development and coding stuff. Each person has their own little flavor, and I think that's what I'm realizing more and more is there's no hard or fast rule to anything. It's all trade-offs. No, it's been fascinating. So now you helped us on the cohorts, which, if anyone listening, that we ran like learning experiences in Elixir and Golang. And Brian, you kind of helped out a little bit with the Elixir cohort. And so how did you get into Elixir as a language itself? Like what was the kind of background in getting into that?
Yeah, it's funny because someone was just asking me that exact question today. Because it's a niche language in a way. But I'd been in the Ruby. I'd been a Ruby developer for a long time, and I really loved Ruby because it's I'm the sort of programmer who like I want to get things done. I want to get hard problems done, and it's hard to get hard problems done when you're thinking about like the small details of things and having to deal with pointers or whatever, right? So Ruby was great for that. And then of course Jose Valim, the creator of Elixir, came out of the Ruby world. He was prolific already in the Ruby world, and decided that he's amazing. He was going to be create his own language and be prolific in that, and did an amazing job at that. So I kind of, in a way, I was kind of hooked into that world where I would listen to some podcasts about where they would sometimes talk about Ruby, but then there was like, oh, there's this new thing, Elixir. And then I think maybe a bit of a shift, a bit of a fundamental thing was I was living in, I just actually moved back to Columbus for a while, Columbus, Ohio. And Joseph Valim came to the Ruby group in Columbus, the Columbus Ruby Brigade. And they were like, Joseph Valim is so great, just come and speak on whatever you want to speak about. And of course he was like, yes, I will speak about Elixir because I've created this language and I'm really excited about it.
I will.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I remember this, it's so funny, just like a year ago, I found a recording of that presentation, and it's a bit grainy, but you can still watch it. And I can find the place where I ask a question of Jose, and just like, I remember having this confusion about how exactly these concepts of like, you create these processes and they can recover from failure if you have supervisors and whatever. And I don't remember exactly what he said, but I was sort of like, how does that work? And like, okay, you recover from errors, but do you still learn about those errors, or like what happens? And it's been this whole process to like learn what that means. And I think it's a really interesting process. I think at the time there were a lot of the Elixir community was struggling with like how to describe these concepts. And I think there's more blog posts out there, more things for people to absorb and come on more quickly. But anyway, that's the sort of place that I came into. I think that was one of the big places. It's just like, oh, this sounds interesting. And if Jose says that it's cool, then I should check it out.
Mm. So was it almost like the timing was right for you to kind of move into it? It was just like a lot of different things lined up and made sense for you. Had you been exploring other languages? Like, I mean, you mentioned about pointers, and is that a reference to Go specifically, or was it kind of you were just on the hunt for some language that suited you, you could say?
I think I'm like super into the idea that different things are good for different purposes. And I'm huge into Elixir now. I feel like probably I'm probably a bit biased that like, yeah, Elixir can be used for just about anything. That's probably not entirely true, but I think the pointers thing, I think I had C in mind. I think, I'd done some C, C++ in college, but I think, so like for a number of years, I was working with Neo4j, the graph database. And that was something I was super into. And I was one of the maintainers for the Neo4j gems for Ruby. Because it was this, we don't have to get too much into it, but like graph databases can let you do certain things faster, or just sort of in some ways more easily. It was kind of, to me, it's not a lot of people use Neo4j for this, but I feel like it was kind of like Ruby in that it helped you think about things at a higher level, and so would let you do things more nicely. But I'm just into that idea of like, okay, graph databases could be good for this purpose, and then a relational database for this, and a document database for this. And okay, well, if I need to make a little service that needs to operate super fast, maybe I make it in Rust or Go or whatever. And so I should know about those languages. And, if I, higher level things, there's Ruby and Python, but now there's Elixir, and it has actually a lot of great advantages. But it's also it's a super hard thing to figure out what's good for different things, because because there's so much involved in like a language, for example, that like, okay, figuring out whether it's good for something, quote unquote, good is hard.
Yeah.
And also people, myself included, I think get emotionally invested in some of the languages that they like for one reason or another. And so it's like, well,
yeah,
it's hard.
Mm-hmm. And Brian, do you use Elixir on a daily basis with work, and what is work for you at the moment? Like, what's day to day look like at this point?
Yeah. So I'm a consultant with Erlang Solutions, and I'm working with a client of Erlang Solutions, which is a company called Bagian. I don't know if you've heard of them. I think Lars Vilkven, I think, has helped them some, and has written about them a little bit on his blog. He's a kind of semi-famous person in the Elixir world.
Okay.
And so they're a company that helps other companies. They make an application that helps companies process invoices semi or fully automatically using artificial intelligence.
Okay.
And so they have, of course, machine learning models, but then they have an Elixir API that lets them sort of coordinate a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so do you deal with a lot of different clients in the day, or is it kind of you work with a specialized group that you sort of walk through and partner with? Like, how does that all work?
Yeah, so I'm usually on a sort of a feature team with a product manager, and we've got a web developer and mobile developer, and sometimes the backend developer, the machine learning team. But then it's nice sometimes we'll have like a product or a QA person who will interface with our clients to help sort of try to get us the most relevant, most needed sort of what is it that the users and the clients actually need. But it's a bit of like layers. Like we, depending on what it is, like we have one big direct client, and then we have some like accounting systems ERPs that we work with, that they have people that are sort of their clients. I honestly don't actually work with a lot of it, like with the customer side as much, but I think we have a lot of different ways that we interface with clients, and we kind of have to do a lot of different dances to integrate, which is kind of an interesting problem in itself.
So is the week quite varied, and you sort of are you doing a lot of different things during the week, or is it sort of fairly predictable?
Yeah, I think it's, I think I'm pretty lucky in that I usually, there's usually one project that I'm working on, but like, for example, something I think I can say on recently is I was just working on helping make sure that our VAT calculations were correct in how we process invoices, because that could be a tricky thing, just dealing with VAT, especially when you just have invoices coming in from a whole bunch of different vendors that they can be, they can do things differently from each other, and so. But I'm pretty fortunate in that they would like to make sure that we're kind of on top of our code quality and in general just on top of things, and so we we try to spend a decent amount of time doing things to make things better, make our code better, or improve things. And so, that's also kind of just how I am. Is like I usually just try to grab at least some of my time for like, I do a lot of like integration with Datadog for our application to make sure that we can have tracing for our requests and our background jobs and all those sorts of things. And that's something that really tickles me, to be able to like, once I've done that, to like, okay, now I have the tools that I need to do my job.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I also, I think just recently, there's something that I got interested in, like a sort of a way of organizing code and referencing other modules. And there's a tool in the Elixir world called Credo that lets you sort of enforce different rules in your code style. And so I created a new Credo rule to potentially enforce that rule. And so I'm kind of curious to see how it goes.
Okay, cool. Well, that sounds to be honest, straight over my head a little bit, but somewhat. I'm sure someone out there will know what's going on. But you mentioned earlier about you kind of worked a little bit for a startup. I think you're right. I'm right in saying, so you had this sort of tech support side of things, and also there was a bit of a startup story going on. Is that something that you would be interested in the future, or is something that's always in the back of your mind? Like, what's the kind of trajectory for you think, in the next sort of 5-10 years in terms of programming? I mean, you may not know, but I just thought it's quite an interesting one just to ask people, where do you see yourself in 5 years, 5-10 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I've kind of, as far as like startups, I've always kind of gone between small to medium-sized companies. I'm not usually as happy in very large companies. I never really saw myself as a consultant until recently, where I was sort of like, okay, this is kind of like interesting to be able to like go to different companies and, maybe try to help them solve their problems, but then maybe move on to another company. I mean, if anybody from Big AI is listening, I'm not unhappy. I'm not, but this is sort of when I originally.
Quite a sensitive thing to ask someone on a podcast, but just obviously assuming everything's going great. Sorry, my cat's just clawing at the door here.
Oh yeah. I just had we just got a puppy about a month ago, and so I'm constantly like having to like, she's barking, or she's maybe once or twice like peeing on the bed, and it's like, I gotta deal with this.
Yeah, no, it's mad. 5 a.m. every morning to 4:30 in the morning, she sort of jumps on the bed and starts like pawing your face. It's cute and adorable, but after a while it's like, come on, leave it alone. But just back to the whole next couple of years, what would you love to be able to do or realize?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm into the idea of like figuring out. I think one of the things that appeals to me maybe about Elixir is that it's still a bit fresh, and so I like what are some ways to sort of pave the new paths and find the new patterns, and especially in like, it's not just like, I was in the Ruby world for a while, and so like coming into Elixir, sometimes there's things that's like, oh, I missed this from Ruby, so it'd be great to like build this or do this, but then there's also just things that are like, oh, this is something that I couldn't do in Ruby very well, but if I just do this, then it could be even more awesome by taking advantage of the strengths of Elixir. So I think that's the sort of stuff that I'm interested in, like finding the neat use cases and talking about them, sharing them, because that's always something that inspires me. Is like when I read, especially when I like read about something like a real use case. And see the details of it, not just like, yeah, we did this thing and we kind of, this is how we went about it. And it's like, but where can I see some code, or like what some details of, yeah.
It sounds like you enjoy like the optimizing side of things, kind of taking something and pioneering a new way to make something better and more efficient. That's what I'm hearing, at least. Is that fair? Do you think?
Yeah, I think, and I think efficient is good, but I think maybe I would say even more, finding ways to make things enjoyable. I'm super into the idea of how can we solve problems so that we don't have to deal with them anymore. Like make
If
libraries
you
so
can
that we
work that
can
one
be
out.
like, okay, now that problem, yeah, that problem's solved now. Let's move on to something that, is it's better use of our time, right?
No, sure. That makes sense. So one of the things that I've enjoyed asking people, especially in the whole, because I would say I'm fairly new to tech as an industry as a whole, and don't come from like a particularly experienced background in terms of developing from a young age, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that has often stood out to me is, and you hear this with friends who are in tech a lot, is there's quite a lot of opinions flying around, which it seems fairly true. But we have this question that we like to ask sort of people who come on our podcast, which is, what is the hill that you would die on in tech? And obviously framing it in a kind of slightly tongue-in-cheek way. But is there a particular mindset or opinion that you have which you're like, this is the hill that I would defend? And it can be anything. So a good example would be like DJ, who's one of our maintainers, you might know. His hill was the role of really key conversation, like having well-meaning and good, well-structured conversation in the tech space. So having that robust, challenging interrogation, which is kind of built on the right foundations, you could say. I'm trying to think of who someone else said. Rebecca at Unison was like, she would rather have 50 people on a team who were hardworking, conscientious, and maybe less talented than one genius who's a nightmare to engage with. So hopefully those are kind of good examples. And I did throw you a little bit under the bus there with that question out of the blue, because there's probably quite a few perspectives that you might have. But is there one that you would be like, no, this is what I'm willing to hold firm with?
Yeah. Because my first thought was sort of like, oh, like camel case versus snake case. Well, I don't know if I'd die on that hill or not. And I think a lot of those things, like, yeah, but a lot of those things, I think I maybe become less opinionated about over time. But yeah, no, I like these higher level things that you're sort of talking about. I feel like there's a, let me see if I can bring this up. Unfortunately, you're editing this, so my pauses are just going to go away, right?
That's the plan,
Right.
at least.
Yeah. So there's a tool called Remote Retro, which I have used a number of times and really highly recommend. And I learned about it because it's written in Elixir. But aside from that, I think it's just well designed. And over time, it's grown to be a better and better tool. But it always starts off with a prime directive, which I think was, as I'm looking at it now, I'm seeing it was taken from Norm Keith. Actually, there's a wiki page here, so you can look this up. You can go remoteretro.org if you want to check this out. Here's the prime directive, which I think is just, it's sort of the thing that you read at the beginning of a retrospective to put people in the right mindset, that it says, regardless of what we discover, we understand and truly believe that everyone did the best job they could, given what they knew at the time, their skills and abilities, the resources available, and the situation at hand. So I think that's good. I think it's similar that, like, you need to make sure that you're always like, and actually I'll even say one more thing. There was an interview, and I can share this if you want to, like, put the link in the show description or whatever later.
refer to it for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Uh, I always recommend this article, even though it's always super hard to find, and it's probably passed a bit into obscurity now. But there was this this man who was a administrator of the Veterans Association in the U.S., the government department, and specifically, I think he dealt with their healthcare system. And he had this interview where he came from the aerospace world.
Okay.
And a lot of what he talked about was how in aerospace, in a lot of, probably it's not perfect everywhere, but in a lot of what he experienced, you would blame the process. You don't blame the people. And if something goes wrong, you say, okay, it's not like I've deleted a table in production, but fortunately nobody blamed me for that. They were like, okay, what do we do now? Well, we make it so that when you go into production on the console, it comes up, the prompt is red. And so it's clear that you're in production, right? Because I made that mistake because I thought it was development when I was, right. So that I was fortunate to have an office in which we blamed the process and not the person. And so that was really great. And so he talked about that in the context of like medicine. That was like, okay, we sometimes maybe a nurse might give the wrong medication to a patient. It's like, well, sometimes the labels are confusing, or there's this thing that's like it's hard, or it's just whatever. It's not ideal. It's like, okay, let's fix that. Let's do it. So if we really do care about the patient, let's make it a process that is harder to go wrong. So that's something that I think is a big deal for me.
That's really cool. I'm going to definitely put these show notes. Is that out of the sort of agile? Is it a kind of built upon agile methodology, you could say, or is it? I mean, where is it, or is it sort of a little bit of something else? What would your thoughts be on that?
That's a good question. I think I got the impression that it was part of a reasonably long tradition in some aerospace engineering circles. I mean, aerospace, I think it just has to do with the fact that like if you're making airplanes or if you're making rockets, you're in the job of like, this needs to work, and when if we put a human on there, whether it's an astronaut or a passenger, right? We need to give it the best chance of working. And by the best way to do that is to put our egos aside and say, what is going to make this work as much as possible every time, if we just follow the process. So I think that's part of it. Yeah.
It just, because when I was looking up remote retro, it looked a lot of like sort of agile like terminology. So I'm wondering if it was maybe kind of pinched from there somewhere. But no, that's really cool. I've not heard that before. The one I have heard is about checklists, especially in medical and aerospace. So it's like a pilot will go through a checklist. That's like he doesn't deviate from his checklist, and a doctor will do the same. No, but that's really cool. So, Brian, we'll start coming into land. I have one more question really for you this evening, and it's really what is your recommendation for the Exercism community in the next week? If you could give one piece of advice, and it could be on anything. It could be like go drink kombucha from, I don't know, your local deli, or go for a run and swim in the Arctic Ocean, or whatever it is. If there was one thing you would recommend to the Exercism community to go and give it a whirl, what would it be this week?
I would say that within your abilities, because maybe this is it's always hard to give advice to everyone, but I think one thing that has been a big thing for me is, I think one time I went into the ER because I was having a sudden headache, and there was maybe a concern that it was like a flash headache, which can be a sort of serious thing. So So I went in and had the doctor look at me, and everything was fine there. But the doctor was just sort of asking general questions and sort of saying like, okay, how much exercise do you get, and what's your activity and whatever. And I was like, being an American, I was sort of like, well, I walk a good bit. I get maybe 8,000 steps a month, or on average a day. And he's like, you should be getting out 3 times a week for 45 minutes, like for really getting sweaty. And,
Wow.
I didn't do it right away, but, I was after, maybe 5 or 6 months, I did get into a habit of running, usually 3 times a week, sometimes maybe 2 times a week. But, and I think that's been something that's been sort of a big change in my life. I think it's helped me a lot. So I think, I know that it's a super hard thing to do, and it's super hard for me to get into. And I think the part of the way I did it is like, I was like, okay, I'm going to go out, and if I end up walking for 75% of the time, then okay, that's just how it's going to be. I'm just going to build it up. But yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. So it's like,
I think that was interesting that you mentioned that, because no, that's really cool, because one of the things that we tried to think through with the cohorts was what's going to facilitate people growing and learning and kind of moving and gaining momentum, I guess, in their coding jog, you could say. And one of them was just getting out, even if it was for 10 minutes a day, just to kind of just put yourself in the place of trying it out. And even if you don't really get anywhere, even if you just read the instructions and then that's it for the day, as long as you turn up in some shape or form, it kind of makes a big difference. But I think that whole that's a great recommendation. Definitely a reminder for me to go and get my sport going a little bit, just because it's so sedentary sometimes sitting indoors. So if anyone listening is out there, take up Brian's piece of advice and head out for a run. And but I mean, it's going to start getting a little bit chillier in Stockholm in the next couple of weeks. So do you still run in the middle of the winter, or is it kind of indoor running?
Yeah, I do. And I mean, I would say also, like, the best exercise you can do if you're going to get out there for 30, 40 minutes a day for 3 times a week or something is like whatever is the thing that you enjoy the most, because if you don't enjoy running, then you're probably not going to be able to keep that up. So, I'll say that first. But yeah, in the winter, I have a hat, which is like, it gets dark in Stockholm too. So my wife got me a hat that has built-in fibers that are retroreflective. So that's nice. So they can keep me safe. And then I have a face mask and ear things I can put on So I do have to bundle up, but it can be good too, because it keeps, when it's cold, my heart rate can stay lower, and I can still get it. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's brilliant. But Brian, I just wanted to say a huge thank you for your time this evening. I know it's probably been a long day, and kids and work and new puppy and all of that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to say thank you for your time and for sharing it with us. And for anyone listening out there, we will put the show notes in the description below, so you can check those things out. If you have any opportunity and you're listening to this, go and check out the Elixir track. And I'm sure, Brian, I don't know if you do any mentoring at all on the Elixir track, but maybe if you are in the mentoring space ever at all, you might see some new people popping in and testing things out. I've heard a lot of good things about Elixir, so I think it's definitely one to watch for the future. And have a wonderful evening, Brian. Just hang on a little bit when I stop the recording, but great to have you on with us, and thanks for sharing a little bit of insight into the life of Brian Underwood. And so thanks everyone for listening, and have a wonderful evening. Check you soon.